Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Helen Arcantu, CEO of YWCA of Northern New Jersey, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. If you've been tuning in to YWTV over this past week, you know that we launched our Unite Against Hate series. And the goal of our series was to address the ongoing uptick of hate crimes that continue to plague different segments of our community. We've had the opportunity through this series to connect with many leaders in some of the targeted communities. We've spoken to the LGBTQ plus community, as well as members of the API community, who both openly shared their fears and their concerns around hate crimes that have impacted them personally. Our goals, as I shared with the series, is really to help us understand more about the impact of these crimes on those who are targeted, to make sure that we inform the community how to report these crimes when they happen and the importance of reporting them. We want you to know where to find resources for support. And finally, we want those of us that may not be members of any of the targeted communities to really get engaged and understand that we all are part of taking action so that we can stop the trajectory of hate that we're on. We believe that sharing the perspectives and stories is really the first step and a very important step in creating empathy and respect for all. Tonight's conversation will focus on the significant proliferation of hate incidents, both nationwide and here in New Jersey, that have been fueled by anti-Semitism, resulting in white supremacist activism. Although New Jersey has been a nationwide leader in taking comprehensive steps to prevent and combat prejudice and hate, the record high number of reported bias incidents should remind us that we still have plenty of work to do right here in our own state. Even as recent as January 29th, the crime of anti-Semitism happened right here in Bloomfield, New Jersey, at Temple Ner Tamid. It was the latest target of a violent crime when a white male was seen lighting a Molotov cocktail and throwing it at the front door of the temple at 3:20 a.m. So these incidents are still happening, and they're still happening very frequently. It was wonderful to see over 1,000 people gather for an interfaith rally at the temple just last week to be able to show their support for the community, as well as to stand up against hate. And again, that's what this series is all about. At this time, I would like to briefly introduce our guests for the series today. We have Ms. Paula Starr, Vice President of Advocacy and Education for the National Council of Jewish Women, Bergen County Chapter. Currently, Paula is semi-retired and working as an independent SBA-approved contractor in SBA loan underwriting. Her career was centered in banking and entrepreneurship, having spent 20 years as a bank executive in commercial lending and as an owner of a retail gourmet food shop, subsequently combining both skills to work for a nonprofit SBA lender and small business training entity. Paula has served in volunteer capacities for the National Council of Jewish Women Bergen Chapter, as well as many other organizations, including New Jersey Bankers Association, her local school board, the Board of Center for Hope and Safety, and the Bergen-Rockland Board of Jewish National Fund, as well as we shared, her work with the National Council of Jewish Women Bergen County section, where she is currently the co-vice president of Advocacy and Education. I would also like to welcome Mayor Michael Wilds. He is the managing partner with the leading immigration law firm, Wilds and Weinberg. He is an adjunct professor at Benjamin Cordazzo School of Law in New York and teaches business immigration law and externship as part of a field clinic faculty. He is a former federal prosecutor at the United States Attorney General's Office in Brooklyn from 1989 to 1993, and the author of Safe Haven in America, Battles to Open the Golden Door, forward by Alan Dershowitz. Having represented the United States government in immigration proceedings, Michael Wilds is a frequent participant on professional panels and a commentator on network television. He testified on Capitol Hill in connection with anti-terrorism legislation. Michael Wilds is also, as we said, the mayor of Englewood, New Jersey, where he does reside. And I would also like to welcome Sundeep Iyer. He is the director of the Division of Civil Rights for the State of New Jersey's Attorney General's Office. He previously served as the Assistant Attorney General and Senior Counsel to Attorney General Matthew Platkin. In that capacity, he was the Attorney General's principal advisor on civil rights matters and coordinated department-wide civil rights initiatives. He also worked with the Office of the Solicitor General on appeals involving matters of constitutional law, statutory interpretation, civil rights, and criminal law. Prior to joining the Office of the Attorney General, he was a senior associate at Hogan's Levels and served as special attorney for the state of Minnesota in the prosecution of 4 police officers charged in connection with the death of George Floyd. He was part of the legal team that obtained the conviction of Derek Chauvin on charges of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter, and he briefed, argued, and won key legal motions for the state at that trial. He also received his AB from Harvard College and his JD from Yale Law School. I'd like to thank all 3 of our guests for joining us this evening for this important conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today, Paula.
Thank you, Helen.
So let's start with a very basic question. What is anti-Semitism, and why has the prejudice against our Jewish communities emerged so forcefully?
You're right. Anti-Semitism has been emerging very forcefully. And we know that the Anti-Defamation League currently stated that 2021 was the highest year on record for documented reports of harassment, vandalism, and physical violence directed against Jews in its 40 plus years of tracking anti-Semitism. And that level is not subsiding. So again, according to ADL, these record-breaking numbers are part of a consistent 5-year upswing in the number of anti-Semitic incidents, unprecedented in the ADL's 3 decades plus of data collection, or 4 decades plus. So, and it's not only verbal, but physical, violent attacks on Jews individually and in groups are at their highest level. So definitely this is a problem that is growing almost on a daily basis. So in its most simple form, we can say that anti-Semitism is a form of oppression that's hostile toward Jewish people. Although the most recent and most well-known example of anti-Semitism was the Holocaust, it didn't start with Hitler. Anti-Semitism dates back to ancient times and has actively manifested itself in each century since the beginnings of recorded Jewish history, although the term itself was not used until the mid-19th century. Over the centuries, the term has come to define the belief that Jews are persistently bad or evil by nature. Because of this belief in an evil nature, it became acceptable to paint all Jews with the same brush and therefore justified their being accused of seemingly completely antithetical negative traits, such as they can be both communists or greedy capitalists. Additionally, this led to blaming Jewish people for societal problems and holding them accountable for government affairs, whether they were domestic or foreign. Over the years, anti-Semitism has morphed with the times to accommodate changing societal trends, moving from anti-Semitism based on religion to cultural anti-Semitism, which led in part to the whole replacement theory, which is popular again today, whereby Jews want to replace the existing culture with their own quote unquote corrupt culture. So we can think Charlottesville, for example, and that slogan of Jews will not replace us. It then moved on to economic anti-Semitism in times when people are poor economically. It can be Jews that are responsible as a group, and then moved on to racial anti-Semitism, which again, going back to painting all Jews with the same brush, claim that Jews are a race rather than a religion, so the evil can never be wiped out, even if Jews are to convert to another religion. So with respect to the current growth in anti-Semitism, there are present-day scholars that believe that the most recent morphing, the most recent form that anti-Semitism has evolved into is a massive conspiracy theory. which now believes Jewish influence is being used to gain national or international power, such as the Jews control the media, the banks, the government. And using this conspiracy basis, it allows for anti-Semitism to gain traction in all directions, from the left, from the right, and globally from a whole range of various populations. Now, if you combine this broad brush concept of Jews being evil as a group, and then you add to that political and social trauma that's going on worldwide now, and which is causing shifting populations in many parts of the world, with countries being threatened by immigration or economically threatened, and which themselves are now in turn causing significant cultural stress. And you're looking for someone to blame, whether it's for the economy or even COVID, for example. It becomes a simple enough to point to the Jews as the cause of the conspiracy. It is a worldwide Jewish conspiracy that's causing whatever issue is the problem at this time. And Jews become ground zero for whatever the current economic, social, political, or cultural malaise there is that exists. Then we can layer on this the fact that we're living in an age where conspiracy theories are rampant in general, and where social media can create a wildfire of misinformation. And you have the perfect storm for resurgence in what's been an age-old prejudice.
Well, thank you for that. And, I think it's important for our viewers to learn about the work that you're doing with NCJW, both locally here in Bergen County, as well as, nationally, what the organization does, just to help give a perspective of, an organization that folks can get connected to learn more about this area and the work that you're doing.
So as you know, or as you may not know, but one thing that we're very proud of is National Council of Jewish Women is currently this year celebrating our 100th anniversary. We have grown over those years from smallish organizations to a organization that is dominant in advocacy, in particular, from coast to coast. And a couple of the large chapters exist in New Jersey. We have a very active council section here in Bergen County. We draw on women who are passionate about advocacy from all sections of whether you're Jewish or non-Jewish or white or of color. It doesn't matter. We are not, although we call ourselves National Council of Jewish Women, our primary goal is advocacy for all. And basically, you do not have to be Jewish to be a member. So, as I said, we're talking about the growth in anti-Semitism and what we're doing to try to combat that on a local level. And we have actually within the past year and moving forward really come to recognize that anti-Semitism has become much more visible and much more emboldened the past several years. And it's showing up not just in our local communities, but even in our places of work, in our colleges, even unfortunately in our high schools and in our elementary schools. Again, as I referred to in the beginning, with the incidences of either passive or actively violent anti-Semitism, being at their highest level ever. So on a national level, NCJW is stressing that it is critical that we speak out and stand up for our own Jewish community and fight just as hard against this form of hate as we do for other forms. It may be a bit surprising that it's more that we now need to join a fight on anti-Semitism because we have enjoyed really a very comfortable and bias-free life, particularly in the United States, for many decades. But that's changing, and I think it's changing for people of all ethnicities. So it's important to create safety for our own communities across the board. And because we at NCJW and at Bergen County NCJW also know that fighting one form of hate is linked to fighting hate in all its forms. One thing that we understand is that Jews are a multiracial and a multi-ethnic group. And as such, we are working to understand and attack the spread of anti-Semitism by seeing it in its broader context and in the analysis of various power groups which are using anti-Semitism to divert attention from the real causes of economic hardship and other societal problems by laying the blame on Jewish people. What we have begun doing, and this is again both on the local and national level, is to start building coalitions among multiple religious and ethnic groups within our community so that we can promote understanding and heal broken communication again across racial and ethnic lines, which we will then link to an increased push to also speak up about and against violence in all forms and about and against hatred against all ethnic groups. We've started this work and we expect to make it a primary focus of our advocacy efforts going forward. So specifically, one, as I said, recognizing that Jews are not a homogeneous group by any means, we have already to date hosted programs on Jews of color in an attempt to understand and deal with the dual inequities of racism and anti-Semitism. These programs have been developed by our Committee on Racial Equity and Anti-Semitism, which has laid some excellent groundwork locally this year toward communicating across color lines and ethnic lines in our community. We have also hosted a program and will be furthering a relationship with our regional Anti-Defamation League, ADL office, in order to stay on top of trends and to help us raise awareness of anti-Semitism and how it relates to hatred in general within our communities. Scheduled also for this current year is a physical trip and an educational program with the Rockland County Holocaust Museum and the Center for Tolerance and Education. We must learn to use Holocaust education not in the vacuum of one atrocity at a point in time, because that is being forgotten quickly as the decades go by, but to use it for a springboard for teaching tolerance toward all religious, racial, and ethnic groups, as the Holocaust itself was not solely directed at Jews. One of our goals for the upcoming year is to sit down face-to-face with communities in our region to share information about our mutual challenges in the area of bias and to develop strategies for action. We are going to do our best to create relationships with coalition partners who are still developing their understanding of anti-Semitism, and we will support their learning as much as we can and wherever appropriate. And we will look to support each other in determining the best course of action to fight any forms of hatred. We also recognize that Jewish people are often held to different standards relative to their relationship and opinions on Israel, which is a sensitive issue. But as with Jewish people in general, these views are by no means homogeneous, as may well be the case for the views of our coalition partners and their independent views on cultural and societal topics. We are going to work to educate our coalitions in that regard, and toward that goal, we can hopefully work together to eradicate bias despite our unique opinions relative to Israel or any of our own cultures. And above all, we will need to stress patience and caring as the foundation of our efforts to build unity and minimize prejudice. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we started doing and what we hope to be doing going forward. It is going to be one of our primary focuses for the upcoming year.
Thank you, Paula. That's it's so important for our community to know about the work that you're doing. Obviously, advocacy, educational programs are all key in us making sure that we are taking part and actively uniting against hate. And also the education programs are so key and important. And again, to our viewers, if you've been watching the series, there's definitely a theme here in terms of empathy building, education, learning about others. It really is key in impacting these biases and this obviously a significant and concerning uptick trend in crimes in this area, and us being able to impact them in a positive way. Thank you so much for joining us today, Paula. We appreciate the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
And you can learn more about the work of the Bergen County section of the National Council of Jewish Women by connecting with them on their social media platforms. We have them listed here, as well as checking out their website. So I'd like to welcome Mayor Michael Wilds. He's the mayor of the city of Englewood. Thank you for joining us, Mayor.
My pleasure.
So you've been featured as a speaker domestically and internationally on anti-Semitism. And recently you participated in the Mayor's Summit Against Anti-Semitism held in Athens, Greece. Can you share a little bit with us in your capacity as mayor of Englewood? What are some of the collective and pragmatic solutions you're applying to help heal your community and create more inclusive community free of bigotry and religious hatred?
Of course. Thank you so much for hosting me. The most important thing I've learned is that there's no one solution or final endpoint. We have to approach social equity and justice, as well as the bigotry and hatred we encounter, as a fresh start each and every day. Society will continue to change, and we have to be prepared to adapt and change with it, meeting whatever new challenges arise and always trying to do better every day. I find that communication is a key element to building relationships and trust as a preventative measure against racial or religious hate. Some community building actions undertaken during my time as mayor included every Friday for the last 3 years holding a virtual coffee with the mayor session, given to community updates and allowing for questions and discussions virtually, actively soliciting for applicants to the different city boards and committees from all ethnicities, religious, geographic, and professional backgrounds. We have an intergenerational city, providing a ground-up input from diverse communities in city operations. I formed a cultural affairs committee to engage more residents and address issues beyond the core functions of government as covered by other boards. And I brought back community life like Englewood Day and actively promoting and participating in community events. 95% of politics is being there. The 5% is making sure you don't choose the wrong answer when you're there. The district that I represent is very diverse and requires this kind of attention.
And so to that end, with such a diverse district, with communities of many backgrounds, how do you engage and support your constituency when acts of violence impact the community?
Well, the first response is always to see to the immediate safety of my residents. When reports came in last year about heightened threats to synagogues in New Jersey and New York, our local police, as well as county, state, and federal law enforcement, were all notified at our Englewood department, and they provided extra security. Soon after it, 2 armed suspects were thankfully arrested in Manhattan, fortunately before committing any acts. When violence does occur, reaching out to the leaders of the faith community is critical. When people are scared or angry in these heightened situations, providing a source of comfort that they're familiar with makes a big difference. We would like to think as elected officials, people could get that trust and connection with us. But ultimately, we know that the bond with a pastor, a rabbi, or an imam is deep and not easy to replicate. Our job isn't to have every answer, but to know our community and bring people to the table who collectively can help see the needs of each resident. And there are people who walk into rooms of all walks of life that see things that are not even in the room that mayors need to appreciate. Being present and letting people voice their emotions and feeling heard is critical. They're usually not easy solutions, but even so, we need to address these issues head on. We may not reach a solution or a resolution, but if we're talking about what's going on and we understand each other, residents will then feel more comfort. Maybe they would reach the same resolution without having these difficult and awkward conversations if we left the room and there wasn't suspicion or doubt breeding again, a breeding ground for hatred. Even if we don't solve every problem, we need to be conscious of how we make other feels in the process. Dr. King said, whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly, and that's a crucial thought to keep in mind when we consider how our broader communications interact and how our our communities in such a diverse city have different feelings of bias and where actually hate can evolve from.
So our intention with hosting these forums really are to help us as a community share thoughts and problem solve, how we can move the trajectory of hate away from, the path that we're on. How can community leaders and municipal leaders join your efforts to rise against anti-Semitism?
Well, first, I think we have to be consistent. It doesn't matter who the target is or who the perpetrator is. When we experience words or actions that are biased or hate-driven or just plain ignorant, we must speak out. It's not a quid pro quo where if we don't feel another group is engaged in standing up against anti-Semitism, we don't need to be concerned about issues impacting them. We need to have a standard, right and wrong. And we know when wrong is wrong, and we have to be vocal in standing up to any action that violates it. Again, communication is critical. Knowing someone is the best inoculation against hating them. You might not like their personality once you get to know them, but that's what we will do by dissolving hate. It's a lot easier to hate someone that is dehumanized. When you know individuals from a community, you experience their culture, their history, their food, traditions, and families. It's difficult to think that a community that remained faceless will lack those traits. You see it as a collection of real people who may have some different customs or look, and you speak to them differently. And ultimately, you'll see that there are nuances that are not different from your own family. It's hard to hate a group in bulk once you've seen them as individuals. And finally, I can just say from the Mayor's Conference on Anti-Semitism, New York City Mayor Eric Adams spoke about it. He had a group called Breaking Bread and Building Bonds. This was an initiative where he set out to facilitate a series of dinners, including 10 to 12 New Yorkers of different backgrounds, in an effort to facilitate communications and build relationships between people, though neighbors, might otherwise never have spoken or shared a table. That's the kind of mentality we need to foster in Englewood. It's been a real privilege to me, as an observant Jew, to walk on my Shabbos, on my Sabbath, miles to get to funerals and to events throughout my city, often walking through rain and snowstorms to show the community that I'm vested in the diversity and that I'm going to be there. And it's important for them to also then be part of the different communities. And I've walked the walk, as it were. I hosted years ago John Lewis. And when he heard that I was the walking mayor that would, on a Shabbos, walk literally miles, he signed a picture of himself and Dr. King. Keep the faith, keep walking. And I have to tell you, that is a measure of love to me. Public service has facilitated in many ways my ability to meet my brothers and sisters throughout the entire city and the state, for that matter. And I think it's very important for us to be out there for every community. And I think once we're there, we know that we'll have more combatants against anti-Semitism too.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor. And we appreciate that you're out there walking and that, we have you with us to help us with this fight.
My pleasure, my honor. Thank you for thinking of me, and please visit Englewood soon.
I'd now like to welcome my guest, Sundeep Iyer. He's the director of the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights of the New Jersey Attorney General's Office. Welcome, Sundeep.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So we know the bias incidents in New Jersey have hit another record high this last year since 2021. With an increase in reported bias incidents, the state is on track to surpass that again. What do you believe is a driving force that's behind this uptick in bias incidents here in New Jersey statewide?
Helen, as you said, you got it exactly right. Bias incidents across the state are skyrocketing. In 2021, our state saw over 1,900 reported bias incidents, and the preliminary figures suggest that those numbers are even higher in 2022. And the numbers are continuing to go up across a variety of different demographic categories: anti-Asian bias, anti-LGBTQ bias, anti-Black bias, and anti-Semitic bias are all on the rise. I think there are a number of different factors that account for that rise. Some of them aren't necessarily problems. For example, I think some of the rise is because of an increase in reporting and improvements to the reporting system we use as a state. And that has encouraged people to report incidents as they happen. And I think that that is critical, because the only way that the state can respond effectively to bias incidents is if we know about them when they happen. But I think that's not the only explanation. It's far from the only explanation for the rise in the number of bias incidents across the state. We're seeing an increase in political polarization across the country, including a failure on the part of leaders to condemn extremism when they see it. And that certainly was true, for example, with the January 6th insurrection and the fallout from that. We're seeing a rise of, unfortunately, of white supremacy across both the state and the country. We're also seeing social media continuing to foment hate and give cover and a place for extremists to congregate. And all of those trends, I think, together explain why we're continuing to see bias incidents rise across the state and across the country as well.
Can you share the education and training unit's work and what strategy your community relations unit uses to build stronger partnerships with community leaders, elected officials, and religious leaders?
Partnerships and outreach are absolutely critical to stem the rise of hate across the state. And it's critical to have community stakeholder partnerships and community stakeholder engagement so that we can build bridges effectively within and across communities. And that's exactly what our community relations unit and our education and training unit do. And I'm extremely proud of the work that they have continued to do. The education and training unit provides trainings at no cost to the public on things like how to respond to microaggressions, bystander intervention training. And those kinds of trainings are important so that people know how to respond when bias happens in their community and when they see it happening. And that's the only way that we can effectively stop bias incidents and bias crimes in their tracks. So people know how to respond when these things happen in their communities, even at the smallest level, even at the level of a microaggression. Our community relations unit does presentations across the state on how to know when you are seeing a bias crime, bias incident, and how to report those things. And that's incredibly important work. And I think it plays at least some part in explaining why bias incident reporting has continued to rise across the state. We're educating people across the state on what to do when they witness bias. And I think that that role is incredibly important if we're going to get a grip on and a handle on this pervasive problem.
So to that end, how can someone report a bias crime incident to your office? And can that be done confidentially if they're, fearful of providing personal information?
So you can report a bias incident online. It's very straightforward. You can go to bias.njcivilrights.gov. If you'd rather call in your report, you can do so at 1-800-277-BIAS and 1-800-277-BIAS. And that reporting will ensure that information about bias incidents gets to both the criminal authorities in our state who have the ability to prosecute bias crimes, but it also ensures that information can get to civil authorities like the ones DCR has. And that's incredibly important because we all know it can sometimes be difficult to make out a criminal case, but even where it's not possible to make out a criminal case, it might be possible to have other kinds of civil remedies like damages or injunctive relief. And those are tools that DCR and the Attorney General have available to us. Fortunately, you don't need to be in a position yourself to decide whether something is a civil incident or a criminal incident. You just need to report, and you can do that through some of the means that I described. To your question, Helen, about confidential reporting, yes, you don't have to give your information. You're only required to provide the information you're comfortable providing. Of course, the more information you can provide, the easier it is sometimes for us to be able to investigate, but you're under no obligation to provide information if you don't feel comfortable doing so.
So one of the reasons that we hosted these forums for our discussions was, really to try to help problem solve ways that we can stop this trajectory of hate that has become very common practice in our country and in our state right now. Whether it's something an individual can do or something collectively we can do through policy reform, what do you think really can make an impact here in terms of getting us on a different path?
I think the first thing is building bridges within communities and among different communities across the state. Research has consistently shown that white supremacy and extremism tend to grow in places where there is not shared cultural understanding across different groups. And I think building that understanding is incredibly important. That's why we're engaged in a public education campaign on these issues. It's why the Attorney General hosted a summit on combating bias, hate, and violence last year to try and bring together community organizations, stakeholders, community members from all walks of life so that we can begin to talk honestly about some of these problems together. I'd also say that our schools are really critical places in the fight against bias and hate. We had a youth bias task force that Division on Civil Rights chaired a few years ago that identified a number of the key drivers of the rise in bias across the country. And what the report found is that bias often starts early. It starts in schools when incidents happen and educators and parents in the community don't respond forcefully to those incidents. So it's incredibly important that our schools be engaged and our education system be engaged, because we need to ensure that students from an early age aren't picking up some of the patterns and some of the leading indicators of bias that can ultimately ripen later in their lives. And we've seen this consistently across the country that can pose problems for our communities. And then the last thing I'd say is it's vital that our law enforcement leaders, our government leaders respond quickly and forcefully to bias incidents and bias crimes when they do happen. And I'm lucky to serve in an administration from Governor Murphy to Attorney General Placken on down the line to Colonel Callahan, the head of our state police, that takes these incidents extremely seriously and has always responded forcefully and made clear that hate has no place in our state.
Thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you so much for putting this event together.
So you'll notice when you're watching this program of our series, it looks a little bit different than the other two did. We have pre-recorded these 3 interviews. So I'd like to thank our guests today for sharing so generously their personal experiences and their collective knowledge around the topic. As with the other parts of the series as well, there's so much to unpack, so much that we've learned from these conversations. Whether you're a member of the Jewish community or not, we hope that you take time to process the information that was shared with you and think about how you can use it to create a to-do list, some action items for how you personally can help stop the trend of hate crimes here in New Jersey, and how you can stand up and stand with our Jewish community so that they know that we are with them in solidarity and will actively be working against anti-Semitism here in New Jersey. As I shared earlier, we believe that there's so much to learn from these conversations and that we really can create an individual plan that collectively will help us work towards change here in New Jersey. We also want you to know that at the end of the series, we will be sharing a toolkit for the community that will have resources on how to report bias crimes, how to identify resources for support, and how to find organizations that you can engage with and become an advocate for and help you learn how to become an ally and an accomplice in this work. And although the virtual series is over this evening, there is still one more installment of this program, and it is tomorrow evening, Wednesday, February 8th, and it is an in-person event, a town hall that we are hosting thanks to the generosity of Caldwell University. We'll be gathering at 7 p.m., and we will continue the conversation and talk about the surge of hate crimes and how it impacts our community and how our community can come together to help with healing. Our featured speakers for the in-person event tomorrow evening are our New Jersey Attorney General, Matthew Platkin, physician leader and social change agent, Dr. Chris Purnell, and mother and community leader from West Essex County, Monique Joseph. We're so grateful that they'll be able to join us, and we hope that you will too. You can easily register for the event in the link that we put right here for you in our chat box, and we look forward to seeing you in person tomorrow evening. We do hope you stay connected to the YWCA and our programs, and you can easily do that by visiting our website. The link is here for you, as well as following us on our social media platforms. And we encourage you to stay connected to the National Council of Jewish Women, the Bergen section. We have the link for you to connect to their website to learn more about their work, as well as our Attorney General's office, the Division on Civil Rights, so that you can learn more about the wonderful trainings that they do and how to report crimes and other resources that are available. And so with that, we say goodnight and thank you so much for making it a priority to educate yourself and to stand with our communities against hate. Thank you.